Hello, welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Connie Kim. North Korea opened fire at a South Korean guard post along the DMZ. While the South Korean military responded with warning shots, it said the incident was less likely to be an intentional provocation. Meanwhile, South Korea's National Intelligence Service said the coronavirus pandemic took a heavy toll on North Korea as it led to market closures and price hikes in some imported goods. We discussed these and more. Today joining us is David Asher, Senior Fellow at Hudson Institute. Mr. Asher was a senior advisor for East Asian and Pacific Affairs at the State Department in the George W. Bush administration. Mr. Asher was also the strategic architect of the Treasury Department's designation of the Banco Delta Asia as a primary money laundering concern in 2005. Scott Snyder also joins us today. He's a senior fellow for Korea Studies and director of the program on U.S.-Korea policy at the Council on Foreign Relations. His book, South Korea at the Crossroads, charts the evolution of Seoul's foreign policy and strategic choices. Thank you so much, Mr. Asher and Mr. Snyder, for joining us today. So let's start with the North Korean shooting on a South Korean guard post. So there are speculations of whether the shooting was an intentional act or not. South Korean military says that it was less likely to be an intentional act. How did you see this?
Well, Connie, I think that increasingly it looks like there is a design behind the shooting. One thing that we have to keep in mind is that according to the comprehensive military agreement that was signed 2 years ago, many of the guard posts have been eliminated, so it actually reduces the possibility of a kind of accidental altercation. But more notable, I think, is that the North Koreans have criticized the South Koreans for violating the agreement, and they have publicized that domestically in the Nodong Shinmun, suggesting that the North Koreans may have their own domestic need to generate an external enemy or to focus, to have the population focus on an external threat at this time.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Asher, how did you see this incident? There are some analysis in South Korea that this incident had some kind of intention behind North Korea.
Well, there are really no serious accidents inside North Korea, except when North Korean members of the elite go missing in car accidents, which seems to happen more often than in many places where there are very few cars driving around. So I would assume this is well calculated and planned by an increasingly insecure Pyongyang regime.
Mm-hmm. So you're weighing more on the analysis that North Korea had some kind of intention behind this. So if North Korea did have an intention, what kind of intentions do you think it may have had here?
Distract attention, gain some sort of internal advantage among certain party forces. We've seen this disappearance for a prolonged period of time by the North Korean head of state, and there's a lot of question as to what was going on there. It's quite possible that it's a sign of weakness, not strength, in my mind. And certainly coronavirus, which we'll get to later, exposes North Korea to potentially colossal internal damage. And so I think North Korea is looking, as usual, to deflect internal weakness externally through some modest demonstration of supposed strength.
Mm-hmm. And currently the UN command is leading investigations into this incident of whether this violates the Korean War armistice or not. And a South Korean military official said that this was in violation of the 2018 Inter-Korean Military Agreement. So do you think South Korea should take additional response measures?
My general point is just that the readiness in the alliance is actually in decay. We have certain advantages now that we've moved to Camp Humphreys to be able to maintain a higher degree of vigilance among U.S. forces in Korea, but to the extent we can't drill overtly with our South Korean ally, I think it just maintains an unnecessary demonstration of sincerity toward a North Korean peace process that beyond symbolism doesn't really exist.
So I want to take a look at the response between the U.S. and South Korea on this incident. So even before the UN command has started its investigation into this incident, Secretary Pompeo and the South Korean military have both weighed in on the possibility that this incident was accidental. So how did you take these two sides' assessment, even before the investigation results were released?
Well, it's a premature judgment. On the South Korean side, it's easy to understand why the Moon administration would want to deflect the possibility of an intentional provocation by North Korea. And it's hard to know exactly what Secretary Pompeo might have been thinking, other than that the U.S. At this moment, broadly speaking, is not looking to highlight tensions with North Korea.
This incident has garnered attention because it happened right after Chairman Kim Jong-un has appeared in the public eye again. So a lawmaker that was briefed by South Korea's National Intelligence Service said that one of the main reasons why Chairman Kim has been seen in the public less this year is because of the coronavirus pandemic. So do you really think that the coronavirus may have impacted Chairman Kim's public appearance this year?
Well, it's a possibility that Chairman Kim is trying to be more careful in response to the coronavirus. But what's really striking to me is that increasingly the rest of the world is intolerant of Kim Jong-un's absence. And that's a little bit bizarre because it actually suggests that somehow the international community is reassured by evidence that a dictator is in control. And so I don't think that we should necessarily be focusing on the leader as much as the question of the level of stability within the system in North Korea.
I totally agree. I mean, Kim going invisible, I guess, is seen as some sign that North Korea may be getting ready to strike militarily by certain people. Perhaps he was even deliberating some sort of action. I don't know that he would strike militarily against anyone right now. It'd be a colossal mistake. His regime would be wiped out very quickly. But I do think he's got to be concerned about his collapsing economy. The North Koreans voluntarily shut down trade with China, which is something like 90% of exports to North Korea. And their trade bilaterally with China apparently declined something on the order of 91%. So, they're already 90% dependent on trade with China. And then 91% of that 90% collapsed. I mean, North Korea is going to be running out of money very quickly in this scenario. And if I were Kim and I'd just built amusement parks and fancy hotels for ski resorts and other luxury entertainment facilities, I'd be very worried about how I'm going to get the Chinese into my country to pay for that at a time when I'm sure the coronavirus is ravaging North Korea.
Mm-hmm. So, like you mentioned, the coronavirus definitely has sent shockwaves to North Korean economy with its borders shut down with China. And we've seen that the North Korean leader has sent a verbal message to the Chinese leader Xi Jinping, congratulating him on his successful control on the pandemic. So do you think that China has room to help North Korea here in the face of the pandemic?
Yeah, I do believe that China can respond and try to help North Korea, but I think we have to focus on the core problem right at this moment. It actually continues to be North Korea's self-imposed quarantine measures, and that's the cause of the currency situation. We also don't necessarily know, David referred to the trade numbers earlier, but there's a big missing piece with regards to continuing ship-to-ship transfers and evasive measures by North Korea, where China has been an enabler. So there's a big missing piece in terms of China's economic support, invisible economic support to North Korea that I think is intended to try to keep the North Korean economy stable.
So, Mr. Asher, when you had interviewed with us previously, you have been a strong advocate of pressuring China to do more on North Korea. So, with the amended North Korea sanctions regulations that will expand secondary sanctions on financial institutions that provide services to sanctions-designated entities, what kind of an effect do you think this may have?
Well, given the pattern up to now, very little. I mean, we've known about, as Scott's already pointed out, massive covert Chinese support. And when I say covert, I don't mean it's not traceable. I mean, you can see it in the Chinese official statistics. So they just don't put it directly as trade with North Korea, but you can see it with the provinces surrounding North Korea, that there's a big bump up in trade with companies, if you look in the commercial trade statistics of China, that are doing business with North Korean partners. So you obviously can tell that they're doing business with the North Korean regime and state at a significant level. The Chinese are starting declaring this, but even their fake statistics aren't that hard to unravel and figure out that China is providing significant under-the-table support.
So you seem very skeptical on China's role in pressuring North Korea to denuclearize. So are you skeptical that we will less likely be able to see the same kind of measure that we've seen back in 2005 when you played a critical role in designating Banco Delta Asia as a primary money laundering concern?
Banco Delta was just the tip of the iceberg. There was much more going on that we haven't elaborated on, and I'm not about to, that involved pressuring North Korea's state, society, leadership and calculations, and China's, than Banco Delta. Banco Delta was just something we could overtly point to at a time when we were engaged in a much higher degree of pressure against the North Korean regime's ultimate stability and strategic direction.
I want to shift our focus a little bit to the CSIS report that reported of a ballistic missile support facility. So there are a lot of speculations about what the main function of this site will be. How did you see this?
Well, this is a site that is very close to North Korea's main airport. It plays a defensive role, and it could also be potentially offensive to the extent that North Korea develops a long-range missile launch capability.
So, Mr. Asher, when you were in government, were you aware of these possible ballistic missile support facilities in North Korea?
Well, what we're aware of, I don't comment on. We're aware of lots of things. But I do think that the North Koreans' attention would likely be aimed at the South Korean program, which I don't think has gotten much attention in South Korea. Certainly, in fact, it's actually somewhat short intermediate range missile, I would call it, that can attack the North Koreans all the way into the far north, apparently. And it could carry a variety of different weapons payloads. I think the North Koreans are more threatened by that than they are by any recent factor that's occurred on the peninsula that I'm aware of.
So a lot of U.S. officials have raised concerns of the North Koreans continuing to advance its nuclear missile capabilities. And Kim Jong-un has reappeared again in the public eye. So what do you think Kim's priority will be at this moment? What do you expect the North's next move to be?
I think North Korea is going to continue to try to develop its military capabilities, but it's going to be constrained increasingly by the economic challenges that it faces as a result of the inability to secure its own supply chain from China. And so that's really the area to watch in the near term in terms of whether or not the North Korean leadership can provide effectively for its people.
I totally agree that I think right now North Korea is focused on its internal weaknesses and it has very few strengths that it can brandish. They're just trying to hang on for dear life and I guess hope for the best without really having a very clear long-range plan for their own survival. This is exactly the time for the United States and other allied governments to put maximum pressure on North Korea.
Mm-hmm. So the economic challenge North Korea faces is one of the pressing issues that it must overcome to pursue its self-reliant economy, like it said last year. We'll have to see what kind of moves North Korea will make in order to overcome these internal difficulties right now amid the sanctions and the pandemic. Well, thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Asher and Mr. Snyder.
Thank you.
All right, that does it for all of us here at Voice of America. Thank you for joining. I'm Connie Kim.